Hey, it's Michael, and I've got a question for you. Can you think of the last time you uttered the phrase, "Huh, I never thought of it that way"? Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore what it means to find common ground at a time when it feels increasingly harder to do so. To listen more than we speak so that we can understand that our differences don't have to divide us. My aim with this show is to bring you perspectives and ways of looking at issues or topics that perhaps you haven't considered before. To teach you how to ask more, better questions so that we might become more reachable as people. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, and it's only when we ask questions and listen that we reveal what connects us as humans. Our dreams, our desires, our experiences, our ideas, and what we stand for rather than what we are against. Later this year, my wife, Kim, and I will celebrate our 15-year anniversary. But in the early years of our marriage, Kim got a job as an advocate for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault at a women's shelter. Prior to her getting this job, and even prior to me meeting Kim and then dating Kim and then ultimately marrying Kim, I had this perception, as I think a lot of people do, about victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And we've seen a lot over the last several years, this reinvigoration of the conversation around these horrific events and a push to not blame the victims for their circumstance and for what happened to them, and instead direct our eyes to the perpetrators. But for me, very early on, call it immaturity, call it youth, or call it just simply not understanding the totality of the situation, I certainly was among those who would say something like, "Why doesn't she just leave?" when talking about a woman who was perhaps stuck in an abusive relationship or an abusive marriage. And upon meeting Kim, and certainly upon hearing secondhand accounts of the horrific things that go on in situations of domestic violence or abuse, my mind was opened to truths and other people's lived experience that I had never considered before. I had never thought of it that way before. Things like, for instance, in a situation where a spouse is abusing their wife, oftentimes the level of control over that partner is so great that the act of leaving the relationship would financially ruin that person. An abuser will create such a dependence on them by cutting off all other aspects of that person's life, the person whom they're abusing, that they make it virtually impossible to leave without loads and loads of support. Oftentimes that support is eroded by the abuser over many years, trying to distance themselves to maintain that control over that person's life that they have. Simply put, until I was exposed to the actual experiences, I had simply never thought of it that way. My understanding was, if I don't want to be in a certain relationship or situation, I can just leave. And I know that's easy for me to say as a man. I simply did not have the perspective of someone in an abusive relationship. And also not saying that men can't be the victims in an abusive relationship, but this is by far and away a men's issue as the perpetrator. But this idea, this question, or this phrase that you've heard me say several times now, I never thought of it that way. That's the title of the book that today's guest wrote, where she dives into some of the most incredible question asking that you will ever hear from a guest here on this podcast. Mónica Guzmán is a journalist. She's the director of digital and storytelling at Braver Angels, a nonprofit working to depolarize America. And as I said, she wrote the book, I Never Thought of It That Way: How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. Mónica also gave one of the most remarkable TEDx talks that I have ever seen. And there are a lot of great TEDx talks out there, but this one you have got to see, and the link is in the show notes. Please pause this podcast right now and go check it out. I hope you did. I hope you went and listened or watched Mónica's TEDx talk. But now let's dive into the conversation, because Mónica is full of curious questions, not questions used as weapons. You know, in her book, she writes, ask someone a question you know they can't answer in the moment, and you're not really asking a question at all. That's a question as a weapon. And what Mónica wants us to get to is this: what am I missing? Mónica wants to get us to more I never thought of it that way moments. You'll hear about the push and pull that exists within her life and how she leans into that discomfort with curiosity rather than division, rather than hate, rather than misunderstanding, rather than just thinking because she has one view of the world that no one else can have a different view. That's often where we tend to get to these days, and it's frustrating. It frustrates me, it frustrates Mónica. And this conversation that you're about to hear is one of my absolute favorites because, and you'll hear it in the conversation, I feel like Mónica and I are kindred spirits on a path to use Mónica's language, help people point their curiosity at each other. Mónica, as I watched your TEDx talk from TEDx Seattle, there were several times where I audibly said, oh my gosh, yes, like, and you gave me goosebumps several times. What was that moment? What was that experience like for you to be on that stage to deliver the message that you delivered so poignantly and so well?
I mean, it was really overwhelming for sure. You've been a TEDx speaker yourself. It's a lot of preparation. I had practiced and practiced and practiced. And what's funny is as you practice and you say some of these things back that you've worked really hard to crystallize, it crystallizes even more in your head. And so when I was up there, it was like, okay, this is it. This is it. And it felt great. It felt great. There was a moment in the talk where I was interrupted by applause, and I did not expect that. And it really was. It was the culmination of a lot of work on ideas that I believe in to my core.
Those ideas that you believe into your core, when did you begin to feel the pull that this wasn't just something that you needed to live out yourself, but that you needed to share this message with other people, both through your book, I Never Thought of It That Way, and through your talk? Where was the wellspring of desire to share this message? Where did that come from, Mónica?
Yeah, I've thought about this question a lot, and I finally figured it out. It was the Seattle Women's March in 2017. I had already been thinking about divisions and how they affected my community and how they affected my friends and how they were affecting the whole nation. I'm the daughter of Mexican immigrants who voted for Trump. I voted for Clinton at that time and Biden later. All of that was swimming in my head, as well as in journalism. What you know, which is that when you get close to people and you ask questions, they almost always surprise you and your assumptions are almost always wrong. So I had all that in my head. I never protest. As a journalist, I go with my notebook, not a poster. That's just unquestioned to me. But a friend had invited me over her house to make posters because I was going to go and cover it. I was going to cover the Seattle Women's March for the publication I founded. And when I went, I was like, I can't make a poster. What? No, I'm not going to make a poster. I'm just going to hang out with her. But I ended up making a poster. And the poster I made is up there, and it just has 3 words on it. It says honesty, curiosity, respect. And so I marched that day surrounded by people whose posters had political ideas, many of which I sympathized with, but none of which I thought was as important as honesty and curiosity and respect. And I was more afraid of what was happening to those 3 things than anything else. And that's when I think I figured, well, gosh, if I can be a journalist who never holds a poster, and I held a poster, maybe it's time that I find other ways to share all this stuff.
Those 3 words, Monica, that you had on that poster, what's missing? Like what? I know that's a huge question, but where have you seen the path diverge? Where do we no longer bring those 3 elements to our conversations? Where have we strayed from that?
The philosophical answer is fear. I really blame fear squarely and absolutely when I think about it very deeply. And it's fear that has a lot of fuel because of, you and I are both in media, we know how the dynamics work today. We know how easily the extremes can be made to represent the whole. We know how easily the viral moments of a person's reaction or anger or hate can be made to represent the whole. And the social science research has showed us that has happened. And so as a result, people are so afraid of each other. And it'd be one thing if we knew that there was a one-to-one relationship between the thing to be afraid of and justifying that fear, but there isn't. I think that there are things worth fearing for sure, and there are behaviors worth fearing, but they are nowhere near as widespread as we believe. So our fear is way bigger than it needs to be. And I think it's fueling so many behaviors we think are protecting us, but are actually hurting us.
You make the point in the book of being aware of just how we're manipulated by institutions to keep us in that fear response so that they can continue to grab us with whether it's national news, cable news, trying to feed us the same message to get ratings and viewership, to you talk about sorting, othering, and siloing, that when we other people to the point where our worldview begins to diminish rather than expand, we know we've gone on the wrong path. How do we become more aware of those moments? I mean, I know it sounds like a simple, just ask yourself more questions, but how do we put that into practice, Monica?
Yeah. Which moments? Become aware of moments when what?
I'll say, 2-part question there, I guess, which I hate. The moments where we know we're being manipulated or steered by institutions, and then also capturing the moments where we can sense that we're diminishing our what did you call it? Our shrinking our world rather than expanding it.
Oof. Yeah. I mean, one thing to say, I suppose, about the institutions that do seem to be keeping us in this state. I don't believe that the people in those institutions want that. I think, it's systems. We've been talking a lot in society in the last few years about systemic things. And so when I look at media, when I look at politics, when I look at some other institutions, but mostly those two, there are dynamics that are embedded in the way that those institutions function that also happen to demand a certain kind of attention from us. And that attention is earned more easily through our anger and our fear and our outrage and just our emotion, frankly. All those things can be really good, but we've seen what can happen when they are mixed in with a world of constant misperceptions. But mostly I just want to make the point that I don't think it's the people in the institutions. I know so many journalists who are doing their dangest to reverse exactly what they see the media doing. So we know that, right? So I just want to make that point. But the way that we notice is, I mean, you said it can't be as easy as asking yourself questions. I think that's true. I think that what you should notice is the feelings that come up as you participate in these institutions. When you follow a candidate's campaign and you hear the slogans and you see the sound bites and you see that person going up to a podium and speaking as if for you, having never met you, or you go on social media and you see, some very influential partisan person has once again blown up Twitter and is trending off of something that makes you feel a certain way. To remember that person knows how to do this. Chances are they know how to do this. We've been at this for years. And that in a lot of ways, it's that person's job to push buttons just to breathe on the platform where they're becoming, where they are what they want to be. And so I think it begins with the emotion. It begins with, the anger, the rage, and then questioning back. Just being like, okay, hang on. What do I not know? And it's probably a lot. Probably don't know a lot. What might be around this that I'm not seeing? Probably a lot. It doesn't mean never get upset. There's a lot of things to get upset about. But it keeps you from so easily being taken down the black holes that have become like an art and a science for so many in our society who really do thrive off them.
Is it fair to summarize what you just said? I was just like, go on. Is it fair to summarize that as if you find yourself constantly being in a state of fear or anger from the messages that you're consuming, question that? Mm-hmm. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think that is absolutely fair. Because the fear and anger, and we know this, again, through research, we know that those emotions push us to what's called cognitive closure. We just want to know. If we're afraid, we need an answer. We need it now. And so we will more quickly just accept what's given to us. We will more quickly, bond with someone who is as outraged as we are because, hey, it makes us feel good when we're so amped up. And all that can be good. I don't want to condemn that dynamic outright. We just have to be extremely careful because this is how we've gotten here to this messy place.
And you alluded to it there previously that the question in your mind, as you write about in the book and talk about in your talk, is what am I missing? that question, it was one of those moments where I was reading your book that it gave me chills. Mm-hmm. I don't want to say how do we get to that question, asking ourselves that more often, but why is it so uncomfortable for us to ask that question of ourselves? What am I missing?
I mean, yeah, for the very basic reason that to ask the question means that you can't believe you have everything you need. And we prefer to believe that we already know what we need to know. And to be fair to us, well, heck, if we live in constant, incapacitating uncertainty, then we can't even take a step into our day, right? There's a balance. But yeah, asking what am I missing presumes that you're missing something. And acknowledging that you're missing something becomes a kind of burden, a kind of obligation to go and ask and find out. And that can take work, that can be inconvenient. And that certainly will put off cognitive closure, which feels really good when we're anxious. So that's why. Plus, we get so many signals, from the discursive spaces that we occupy, particularly social media, that of course you know everything you need to know about what those people think. Of course you do. Don't worry about it. We're all here. We know what's what. You don't have to go asking. You don't have to doubt. Just believe me, retweet me. Believe me, retweet me, go and subscribe and do all these things. And sure, I mean, and we can, and we should, and there's no reason not to, except for the fact that, again, these systems are stacked against understanding.
In those moments where we feel like we have that certainty, when we feel like we have all the answers that we need, and the people who think like me are right and good and justified, and the people who don't think like me are the exact opposite of that. You're asking us to do a really hard thing, which is to seek out those divergent viewpoints, right? In practice, it sounds easy, I guess. Hey, go seek out somebody who believes, go seek out a Republican if you're a Democrat, go seek out a Democrat if you're a Republican, for instance. The actual putting that into action, what does that look like? Because I am assuming we can't just go and walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, are you a Democrat? Let's have a debate about abortion or the student debt crisis." Like, how do we put that into action? How do we place ourselves into those moments where we can have those really difficult, uncomfortable conversations?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, not exactly easy. I will say it is possible to do this on social media. It's just a higher level of difficulty and the conditions are more rare. You can create them. So we can come back to that if we want. The other thing to keep in mind is, of course, everybody's context is different. Some people live in really blue areas. Some people live in really red areas. Others in extremely purple areas where it's like a constant battle of bumper stickers and lawn signs. Because we know what that looks like. But I think it's acknowledging, again, that everyone has a different context. So it's about, I would say it's like this. If we have sort of a machine, a sort of a radar for difference, it's almost like turning that up a little bit. Like where might the difference be? Where can we hear a little bit better? So for example, right, like if you're in Seattle, a place that's very Democratic, and you have complicated views on abortion, like I happen to have. I often like my radar on abortion is kind of turned up because there's this expectation that everyone believes everything in a certain way and everyone should believe this. But I can kind of I can sense if someone in the room just kind of looks a little uncomfortable or seems to be holding back, right? And then I can approach that person and say, "Hey, by the way, back then when so-and-so brought up abortion, I noticed you kind of made like a face. What was going on there?" And they might say, "Well, actually, like I just have mixed feelings about this, Oh, okay. Can we talk about that?" Now, I just gave an example of like, I have mixed feelings about abortion as well, but it works when you go to the opposite. So the publication that I had in Seattle, the Evergrey, we had sent a newsletter and I got an email back from one of our readers, Melina, and she wrote just very quickly but beautifully about how she is queer and Black and a conservative in Seattle. And me being a liberal, Latina in Seattle, I was like, oh my gosh, huh. And so I responded to her. I asked if she wanted to write an essay for us. She did. And then later, I was like, I'm still curious about her. I'm really, really curious about her. How did she come to believe what she believed? So I just asked her for coffee. And now we're good friends. So there's also a point of you're interacting in the way you might be interacting. And then you can take the opportunity to move things to conditions where you can explore each other more comprehensively, more fully. So if you're on Twitter, I don't know, like start DMing. And if you are DMing, maybe you can do a phone call or a Zoom call. And if you're in person, maybe it's a quick thing at a party. And then later you end up asking them to coffee because you just want to talk and you're curious. So, that it takes some time. It's not the kind of thing that you can just do right then necessarily. But you can always plant those seeds and then watch what gets planted in your mind without your even noticing. I think that is really, really, really cool. You'll interact somewhere in the world and you'll hear someone say something like, huh, that's interesting. And then several days later, it's still tickling your brain. Well, can you reach out to that person? Can you just send them a quick email? Like, is there something you can do? So anyway, this is a very big topic, very complicated because there's so many different experiences, but that's my opening statement, I suppose, on that answer.
That reader of the Evergrey who wrote that essay, and I apologize if I missed the name, Melina?
Melina. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Why did you why did you take it that next step further to reach out and interact versus what I think a lot of us would probably do, which is, thanks for sharing your perspective. I appreciate you. Have a great day. Like almost like brushing it aside. Why did you take the next step to seek out more?
So this is where something kind of fun from curiosity research comes in. There's something called I curiosity and then D curiosity. So D curiosity is deprivation-based curiosity. It's something is like freaking you out and you need to know. You need to know because you got to get rid of the bad feeling. And then it's like being thirsty. And so you get water and you're done. Oh my God, thank God. I curiosity is interest-based curiosity. It's like the curiosity that comes when you are really fascinated in a hobby or something like that, and you just want to know more. Something's pulling you. So in the case of Melina, it was very much I curiosity. I mean, having read her email and then she said more in the essay, it just created more questions and more questions and more questions in my own head. And the kind that I just thought, I'm not satisfied. I think this person's really interesting. And I love my city and I want everyone here to thrive. And I think Melina might have an experience that I need to understand if I want to do my job as a journalist here and help people thrive. So it was that. It's just like couldn't stop being fascinated. Now, that is not necessarily the most common experience with curiosity these days. It's most people started D curiosity. And maybe even most of the time, that's where I start too. When I hear something that it's a disagreement that really kind of shocks me or stuns me, then it is sort of like why in the world would they believe that? And it becomes something that I got to get rid of that fear. I got to go ask. Either way, same outcome. Either way, if you are pulled in, then follow that calling, right? It can take some courage, but it may be easier than people think.
As you mentioned, you are the daughter of immigrants who voted for Donald Trump. I'll ask a very pointed question here, Monica. Is it easier for you, having grown up in that kind of like that strange, squishy place?
Mm-hmm.
Is it easier for you to get there than it would be for someone who has a bubble of their family and their friends that they've either grown up in or created or a combination of both? Is it easier for you?
Yes, I think so. But I'll say this, I have met lots of people who have someone polar opposite them in their family, close enough that it's a thing. And actually it makes it harder for them. So I don't think that it's always true that if you have someone close to you who is your political opposite, then that is going to make it easier for you to be open to that side. I don't think that is always true. I think that it is about the nature of the relationship. So my parents and I talk about politics openly and whenever we want. We've stumbled into a way of doing it that works and is kind of awesome and is always very interesting. I'm always afraid that when I talk about this, people have this idea of me and my parents just like, sitting like drinking some tea and just like, whatever, like Trump. Yeah, whatever. No, it was yelling. It was raw. I said horrible things and they said horrible things back. Like I really want to make that very clear. Like, being honest in conversations like this means being angry if you're angry. It just does. So yeah, but in my case, it is absolutely easier because when I think of, when I think of Trump and Trump's ways and things like that, I get all kinds of worked up, right? There's a lot of stuff going on there that I'm not okay with. And then when I think of folks who voted for Trump, I have not only my parents who I love and are amazing people and whose reasons I know and understand. I also have now, in large part, thanks to them, so many other people that I've talked to and love in my own way, like, and understand. And so I have all these faces of real people who I know are totally good, obviously, and totally intelligent and totally awesome, who made this choice. And so it's like antibodies against the belief that people who voted for Trump must be horrible people. And so that is what makes it easier. It's literally being a little bit more immune to fear. But only because I've gathered the antibodies. You know what I mean? And that was not easy.
I so relate to that. I grew up in red state, Kansas. Now consider myself politically independent. And even that, I feel like sometimes has a stigma. But I've had those conversations too, those knockdown dragouts with family members. And it always, of course, comes back to love. And it breaks my heart when I see people cutting family members out of their life over these sorts of discussions. And you make a point in the book to talk about how the fact that values, we have different values, but they're not binary. They're not, my values are good, so yours are wrong. My values are right, so yours are evil. Why do we flow so much into binary states for our values? Because that to me is one of the biggest revelations that you put forth in your book is you've got to understand where they're coming from and their values. The conversations you had with the folks in rural Eastern Oregon. I had a documentarian on who kind of did a documentary about the same place. That's fascinating to me. Can you just dive in a little bit more into this understanding that it's not a one end of the spectrum or the other kind of thing when it comes to our values?
Yeah, it comes back to that question of what am I missing? Because it just so happens that the ways in which we're polarized and divided, I mean, polarized, it's even in the word, poles. You know, a polarized world wants to put everything on poles. It's this or that. It's us and them, and it's every other thing. Now, poles are extremely easy to understand. Poles are great when we're afraid because of the cognitive closure they give us. It's either this or this. Make your choice. It can't be that hard of a choice because there's just two of them. So pick a side, and then you're home, and then you can feel not like you figured out the world, but at least like you have a community. Now, I love community, but there are dark sides to community. There are dark sides to belonging. And so it begins, I think, with understanding that that's what polarization is and does. And that is what it is doing to our world. But I mean, we know this from every fairy tale, you know, like every fictional story we tell children. The good guys are way too good and the bad guys are way too bad. We know this. So when we see that same trope echoed in the way we talk about our own society, come on, we have to know that's not the whole story. You know, like, what do we think? We're living in a fairy tale? Like, how is it that we believe that our own lives are extremely complicated and nuanced, but not anyone else's? You know, they're just doing X, Y, or Z. It's kind of absurd when you sit and think about it. So values do get put on a binary the same way because it gives us an easy out, frankly, right? You know, to say they don't share my values. Therefore, I have no obligation to learn from them. There's nothing I can learn from them. We have decided at our core to subscribe to different things, and they are subscribing to the wrong thing. Therefore, I am completely justified in having no curiosity, no relationship whatsoever. You know, it makes logical sense. It's certainly understandable, considering, again, how much there is out there to truly be afraid of, and how difficult it is to manage that. You know, and how much pain. I get it. I don't judge anybody for this. Do you know what I mean? Like, and none of us are like Zen masters. Like, this stuff is really, really hard. But we have gotten to this place where we don't question this idea that they don't share my values. And I think it's time to question that. Like, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure are you thinking of values the right way? Do you know what their values are? Do you think that the way that you characterize what they believe is how they would characterize what they believe? Which of you is more right? How can you know what they believe if you don't hear from them, what's the truth about other people's beliefs and how do you access it anyway? And who are you to say what values underlie other people's beliefs anyway? How do you know? And you have to ask, what am I missing? Which is really annoying. You have to do it. You have to do it if you want to have accurate disagreements, right? Because that's the thing, is like the reason my book has a bunch of eyes on the cover, right? Is because polarization blinds us to truth. It just does.
That phrase you just used, accurate disagreements. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, we're having completely inaccurate disagreements. There's a lot of numbers about this that I'm not going to remember right here, right now. But plenty of polling, of one side, ask one side, what does the other side believe about X, Y, or Z? And it's just so far off. It's laughable. So the stories we're telling each other, isn't it so funny to be surrounded by information, but be completely misinformed? It's the most fascinating paradox of our time to me. We are more connected and therefore less connected than ever. More of us are talking, fewer of us are listening. We are throwing information out there all the damn time, and we are less informed about each other than ever. Like, wow. And so you have to ask, like, what is this information even doing? What is it contributing to? So yeah, we're having, I think, very inaccurate disagreements because we come into them assuming that we know the way in which we disagree, but we don't. And so we begin disagreements already at the point of fighting, right? Where we think we know what the other person believes, but do we? Do we? And what if we began by asking the questions, checking it out? I say in the book that curiosity begins by turning an assumption into a question, So when you hear something from somebody and you go, oh, they're just X, then you immediately go, are they just X? And you turn that into a question. You find a tactful way to say, well, tell me about, I don't know, tell me about this or that belief of yours. And then you listen. But imagine if you had come in guns blazing, right? If you had already assumed you knew what they believed and the degree to which they believe it, and you launch it in their face. Boom, everything's defense, shields up. And it's just pew, 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 and everyone trying to win. And, and then some relationship is severed. And on it goes.
That's when we use our questions as weapons, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because questions are, questions are not all curious. They are not, by their definition, all curious. For a question to be curious, it must have as its primary motivation the filling of a gap between what you know and what you want to know. If it has that as a primary motivation, then you will take care to make sure that it is not also an accusation, which is going to make the other person less candid. That it doesn't have a baked in assumption about what the other person believes, which is going to narrow that person's framing around how they can answer, and also make them feel like you're not actually hearing them for who they are, but that you have a certain expectation that they will deliver you. The goal with any questions to another human being is you have got to make sure that you can be honest with each other. If we're not honest together, we're not together. May as well have never been together. Because what are you learning? You're learning talking points. You're learning coping strategies. You're learning defense mechanisms. You're not learning who they are and what they believe. And so we're just pretending and posing to each other, exacerbating the misperceptions and not actually letting anybody in. And I don't know how we create a great society that way, or even a great, family, or a great community if we don't make it okay to actually say what we really think, even if it's messy.
We've heard so often over the last, I don't even know how many years, put a time frame on it, doesn't matter as much. There's so much disinformation, misinformation. There are bad actors out there, which definitely could be true. But you write in the book, I'm done going along with the idea that if we could just rid the world of misinformation, everything would be fine. Why are you done with that idea, Monica?
Because we act as if misinformation is exists in a vacuum. We act as if it's like just something that, if we just get rid of it, if we just keep cleaning it up, it'll eventually go away. But I think we often forget that it's all people. It is all people. Everything begins and ends with people. We are the most powerful and mysterious elements in the universe. Like, we're amazing. And there's so much complexity to us. So when I think of fake news, right, I think fake news travels when it speaks to something that feels true for a lot of people. So the thing to do with fake news, to me, is not just to try to get rid of it, try to create, pull it out like weeds. They keep coming back, try to get rid of it. It's not that. It's get curious about why it's working. Get curious about what is it about the conclusion that fake news story is saying and giving people like permission to believe, right? What is it about that conclusion? What on the path to that conclusion resonates with people? Because if something resonates with people, there is a truth about the human experience to explore, not a factual truth, the conclusion is totally wrong. There's it's totally wrong. But there's something in the pull people feel to it that is true. And not only that is true, but that it is not being acknowledged. So that's what I've observed in fake news and misinformation is like, you wouldn't need it. People wouldn't gravitate toward it if it's almost like a black market, right? It's like a black market for stories. It's a black market for seeing things about one's experience reflected back. If the central storytelling institutions of our society are not able to acknowledge certain truths about human experience, then the fake news black market will. And it will pull people even further down rabbit holes because they feel so aggrieved and they feel that, they're being told by fake news and all these other places that nobody understands them and they believe it. And so boom, they're taken further and further and further into these black holes. So yeah, to me, the exact wrong thing to do is to just chop it all off, chop it, hate on it, shame people for it, talk about how everybody's idiots who believes it. Oh my God, are we missing the point? Holy wow, like, come on. If you apply even a little curiosity to that whole thing, why is it working? Why is it working? Why is it working? Let's go talk to people. What did you see in that? Well, maybe you saw a value reflected back. Maybe you saw maybe there's a suspicion that you saw in there borne out. And there's a truth behind something in that suspicion that we should explore. Like, what is it? And it's, I don't know. So yeah, I think that, journalists and others often say, well, it's like, well, misinformation is so rampant because we're in a culture that doesn't respect truth, doesn't honor truth. But I think you can also look at it the other way around. It's like, we don't, it's not that we don't honor truth or don't respect truth. It's that we've forgotten to look for it in each other. We've forgotten to look for it in each other. And beneath whatever is factually right or wrong, that's not all of truth. Like human experience, human emotions, human interpretations. That's the layer that creates our lives and our society. So if you see a bad fact and then decide to throw out the entire potential story because of that bad fact, you're missing a lot of truth. So what am I missing? Always comes back to what am I missing?
That question. I came across, I had the question asked of me on Twitter recently. What do we do about bad actors in positions of power who have no desire to engage in these conversations? They just want to spread misinformation. They just want to spread, lies perhaps or things that aren't true. What do we do about those? How do we ask questions of them? And my response, and I'd love your response too here, Monica, is it's not about you engaging with some cable news network host. It's making sure that you have enough of a diverse network that you have somebody who perhaps believes what they're saying to go and ask them, how did you come to that belief? What's been true in your life that you would think that and subscribe to that? Can we have a conversation so I can understand this? The onus is on you to diversify the people who are around you so that you are not filling your own echo chamber with something that somebody else believes is completely asinine and misinformation. Yeah. Your thoughts? Am I on the right path there?
I completely agree. Yeah. I mean, and that is where it's so much easier to try to change things by going to, like by going to the, whatever it is, the partisan voices, the bad actors that are actually like producing, farms of misinformation to exploit people, like intentionally. This is gross. It happens all around. There's a lot of actors exploiting us. And by far the easiest thing to do is like, well, we all know the name of those folks, and we know their social media accounts. And so we can just talk about how awful they are. And all that does is make the folks who have really found something true in what they hear from those bad actors get even more sort of committed to the idea that those bad actors are on their side. And so, it's like, in my head, I sort of see this two-layered web, right? And so there's this tier of all the influential bad actors up here, and then all of us down here. And so those of us who maybe see this as a real issue and wanted to change, we're aiming our arrows like up, we're trying to attack. When what we should do is reach out to each other and like form the, try to form the bonds and connections. And they can be extremely weak, by the way. They don't need to be like some kumbaya like circle. Just form the bonds and connections that allow people to be seen by others in their lives, so they don't feel this need to be seen by some faraway personality that that doesn't know them. But I can't help but wonder, that something deeper than all of this is a little bit like the epidemic of loneliness, the epidemic of disconnection. Everyone goes to their screens before they go to each other. What are we doing? We go to these stories and this system of entertainment before we'll just talk to each other. And it's making conversation itself. It's something you can just opt out of. I mean, you can do everything here. Why would you need to ever talk to a human being? The spontaneous opportunities to connect with people are diminished. Some folks are young enough to not even know what it used to be like, right? Where you couldn't wait in line by being on your phone, and you might actually notice, someone ahead of you in line who looks really interesting, or like, oh, what did they just do? Let me ask them about it. And so, it really, to me, comes down to we're turning to all these, we're turning to some monsters because at least the monsters appear to be listening.
Ooh. Monica, my goodness. You and I are trained. You and I are trained to ask questions as journalists. It's within our DNA at this point. Is there anyone that comes to mind who you have met or worked with that has taken this idea of asking the question, what am I missing? Who has taken, you, to use your words, the idea that certainty is the arch enemy of curiosity? Anyone come to mind where it's, I'll use the word worked, where it's worked, they've dug into the discomfort and the uncomfortableness, and it's worked? Anyone come to mind?
Yeah. Do you mean journalists in particular, or do you mean anyone?
Just anyone. I think people that aren't trained on how to ask questions, like you and I.
Yeah. Well, I mean, someone who comes to mind immediately is someone I spoke with again yesterday. But she got an early copy of my book. Her name's Megan. And she had this relationship, very close relationship, that was fraying in a big way. because they had decided they were completely political opposites. They decided they couldn't really talk about it. When they did, they lashed out. And anyway, she told me the first time we talked about the book, she told me, like, I've saved my friendship. I've actually saved it. Like, this is amazing. and I was just like floored because, I mean, that's everything. So yeah, it depends too on the outcomes that we want, right? Like, you know, for some, I think what is needed is a restoration of a relationship through understanding. For some, it is more like the intellectual understanding. Like, I need to understand my world because it is preoccupying that these confounding things are happening so close to me. And I know that it is making me feel some kind of way about people. And I need to figure it out because this is crazy. And for others, I think the need really is, and maybe they don't see it, maybe they do, to reduce the fear. I think for some, the need is to reduce the fear. I think that a lot of people are more scared than is probably justified. But the response is to continue to build distance. And as long as that's the response, the fear will increase. So anyway, but I only answered your question with one example. There's folks who, you mentioned the trip to Sherman County, Oregon. There's folks on both sides of that divide who had assumptions about each other that were changed because they got curious about each other with each other. I could go into examples. There's also, as far as journalists, a woman named Amanda Ripley has done incredible work on this. She wrote a book called High Conflict, and she is helping lead journalism itself toward uncertainty, toward embracing what we don't know, double checking with sources about all kinds of things, keeping our own, convictions in check. All kinds of really good work is going on there. And we know it's working because it's creating stories that people can hear again. Because when we speak with too much certainty, we can only speak to a narrow set of people. And, but when we are able to embrace our uncertainty, more people can be invited in by that mystery. And that is a truer thing. It's just always truer. I don't know if I'm making sense there.
Yeah,
but
no,
I'll leave it at that.
You are for sure. Are we afraid of the emotions of these conversations?
Definitely. Oh my gosh.
Is emotion a good thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
leading
question, admittedly.
No, of course, yeah. No, but it is. It is all how you look at it. And again, I don't want to come off naive. I am blessed, privileged, fortunate, use your word, to have a really strong relationship with not just my parents, but a lot of folks who are my political opposite, who I can ask anything of. That's great. That's really hard for a lot of people. For some people, it's like a non-starter, and they don't know where to begin. And the relationships are already bad and burned. But if you can do the following, I think you can go far, which is when you see emotion launched at you, even if it's in the form of an accusation, even if what you want to do is immediately defend yourself, if instead you kind of like put it through a filter of listening to that person, and if you put it through the filter of listening to that person, emotion becomes data. So anger is really cool because it shows you that you are getting close in conversation to something that really matters to this person. One of my favorite authors, Valerie Kaur, says in her book, See No Stranger, that anger is a force that protects that which is loved. So if you look at anger that way and you go, oh, wow, okay, I hit a nerve. There's something here this person really cares about. And then your next thing, instead of it being a defense or a counterattack or anything like that, if you're able to stand in the space of humility and curiosity where you ask, wow, I didn't realize you cared so much about that. Can you tell me more about that? And just watch how disarming that can be. And then you've changed the conversation immediately. So emotion is good. The same with sadness, the same with checking out, disengagement. Everything in a conversation is data. Every reaction, every response. You can listen not just to words, but to the entire person. Which is, again, one reason social media, not great, because you don't get to, you use like 10% of our actual communications toolbox.
And conversation is messy. It's not perfect. Like we go into these conversations expecting to have the perfect argument or the perfect discussion. And gosh, be messy with people, right? Be messy.
Yeah.
Monica, what's a question that you wish you were asked more?
In my daily life?
I'll leave it open and vague.
Oh my gosh, what's a question I wish I was asked more? I guess this is sort of silly sounding, but like, what are you most curious about right now? What are you really into right now? Like, what's something that's got you really excited? And I can talk about all kinds of things, and I can survey my day and be like, oh, you know what? Like, I just discovered this TV show. It's like amazing. Or did you know about, I don't know, this plant in Seattle that like you can eat the leaves? I didn't even realize. And blah, blah, blah. I love that question, because then it's like a little comparison of notes of fascination. Yeah, I like that.
So I'll modify your question a little bit. I do want to ask you the question, what are you excited or curious about right now? I want to put it in this frame. Your book is now out, and your TEDx talk from TEDx Seattle is now out. What in the responses to those has gotten you really curious or excited? Has there been anything that's cropped up that you've said, oh, I'd like to go down that rabbit hole?
Mm-hmm. I've heard a lot of stories of people saying, here's my situation with so-and-so. Here's what I think I'm going to try. Or, man, I really had given up on this, but hearing your talk or reading your book makes me think maybe it's not over. And so it makes me really curious about, oh my gosh, now I just want to know. I want to call all these people and be like, how'd it go? Tell me what worked, what didn't. Like, I want to know, because this book is so not the final answer at all, not even close. It's not even an answer, really. It's just helping people ask better questions. That's really it. And questions are never done. These things are not done. It's an ongoing conversation. And I always tell folks too, because like you said, there's this temptation to think that, well, gosh, I didn't get anywhere in this one conversation that lasted an hour and like whatever. But what I want to help people reframe is, if you're able to have the same conversation again with someone, the conversation never ended. You're still in it. You're still in it. And it could take days, weeks, years, but keep that conversation going, and meet each other where you can. And that's really it. That's all you need. So there's a courage in that kind of patience. And I'm really, really curious to see, what people see that is possible that wasn't possible before.
I'm reminded of what you wrote in the book when you talked about, and it was one of the points that I highlighted. The point of building bridges is not to cross them, but to keep them.
Exactly. Yes.
Can you explain that a little bit more so people get the full weight of what that truly means, Monica?
Yeah, because it is one of the most powerful arguments against this whole effort, is to say, look, I tried. I went and talked with that person who confounds me, and I listened, for a while. And you know what? They just talked at me. They never got curious about me. I was just sitting there asking all the questions. And then they yelled at me. They got so angry. And it's so clear that I'm not changing their minds, which again, Looks like you assumed that you could change their minds. That might be a problem, right? And like, they're not explaining themselves to me in a way that on my terms and the way I understand. And so what did I do? I burned that bridge because it obviously didn't work. I burned the bridge. We're done. And I'm never going to build another bridge again. And I hear that so many times. I saw an op-ed in the New York Times that made that exact argument. And I'm like, really? Really? And so what do we do? When you stretch that out, the long game, every time we do that, we expect something from someone else on our terms, on our time. Think of the way, I'm just going to be like blunt here. Think of the way that dishonors other people. Things on our terms, in our time. I want to change you. I'm gonna listen to you so that I can change you. Wow. Like, really? And we don't have time and things are too urgent. I get it. But man, you burn that bridge because it didn't work on your terms, on your time. And there's a lot you're missing. There really, really is. But if you can just keep that bridge, if that conversation where you're asking all the questions, they're just getting angry. And if you find the courage to just find a point in that conversation saying, thanks. I know this was probably hard to talk about, but I appreciate it. I appreciate you telling me all this. And then just be done and see what happens. See if the next time you see this person, maybe there's a way to pick it back up again. And I'll say one other thing. When you ask other people questions for a long period of time, sometimes it gives people their only opportunity to listen to themselves. And when people start to string their reasons together out loud to someone who is respectful enough to let them do it without then having to bring up their guard unnecessarily, and they listen to themselves, pretty amazing things can happen just from that. You may not know. You may think it was a failure. It was a failure of understanding. You may have given that person the gift of understanding themselves and seeing maybe contradictions that they hadn't recognized, seeing complexity that they hadn't seen. Are they going to admit it to you right then in that moment? Well, maybe not, because, hey, you're on opposite political sides and all the messages we see in our world are about distrusting, right? You got to give it time. But then, they may ask you questions and you may have to listen to yourself, string together your reasons and maybe realize that maybe they're not as great as you thought. I don't know. But that's the gift that conversation gives us. And we have to be brave enough to take it.
Monica, I knew this was going to be a great conversation. That was a fantastic place to leave it. How can people connect with you, get the book? I'll, of course, link your talk in the show notes. But yeah, how can people continue the conversation with you?
Go to reclaimcuriosity.com and there's links there to pre-order and to reach out to me. Also Twitter at Mónica Guzmán. As problematic as Twitter can be, it's also a wonderful place to connect on great ideas. So yeah, so reach out to me there at Mónica Guzmán on Twitter and reclaimcuriosity.com.
Beautiful stuff. Monica, thank you so much for joining me and for writing a fantastic book. Keep up the incredible work and let's stay in touch, okay?
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael.
So many thanks to Mónica Guzmán for sharing her story on the show in this episode. Please do me and Monica a huge favor. Share this episode with someone you know who might find some value in listening to today's conversation, who needs to get more curious in their conversations and ask more questions, not as weapons, but as part of aiming their curiosity at someone else. Share this episode with your network. Help spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions. And if you like the conversations with the incredible guests like Mónica Guzmán that I have on the show each and every episode, please subscribe so that you never miss when a new episode drops. If you ever want to get in touch with me, you can email me at michael@thefollowupquestion.com, or you can go to michaelashford.com and reach out there. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question. And until then, keep asking questions.